You think your family not showing up to your graduation is the worst pain you'll feel that day? Think again. I walked through the door of the home I'd poured my soul into, still in my cap and gown, diploma clutched so tightly it crinkled in my hand, only to be handed an eviction notice by the very people who were supposed to be my biggest supporters. I remember the exact sound of the key turning, the soft click of the latch, like a gun being cocked before firing. Inside, my parents were waiting. Not smiling. Not proud. Just waiting. Brenda sat rigid on the couch, her lips pursed in that permanent line that said disappointment was her default expression. Mark stood behind her, hands in pockets, like he was about to deliver a business decision rather than destroy his daughter's sense of home. And Kieran, my golden boy brother, leaned against the banister with that smug look he'd perfected over the years. For a moment, I thought they might be planning some kind of surprise. Maybe they'd forgotten the ceremony and wanted to make up for it. But then Brenda spoke, her tone clipped, rehearsed. "Ilara," she said, "Kieran's getting married next month. He needs a stable place to start his life. You're young, resourceful. It's time you moved out and let him have the house." I laughed. Actually laughed, because I thought it was some kind of cruel joke. I looked down at the floor, then back up at her, searching for a hint of irony. There was none. "Moved out?" I asked. "Mom, I've been paying the mortgage since sophomore year." My father's jaw tightened. "You helped, Ilara. That's what family does. You should be proud you could contribute." "Contribute?" I repeated, my voice cracking around the word. "Dad, I've paid every single month. The loan's in my name. I literally own this house." Kieran snorted, rubbing his chin. "You can't own something that was never meant to be yours, Ilara. You were just helping out." Something inside me went very still. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, but not the kind that comes from tears, the kind that comes before fire. I looked at each of them slowly, one by one, and realized I wasn't part of this family. I was their investment, their labor, their insurance policy. So I smiled, a small, sharp thing that felt foreign on my face. Brenda's eyes flickered uneasily, as if she'd seen a ghost. "Okay," I said quietly, "if that's how it is." And then I turned, gown swaying against my knees, and walked upstairs. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I just started packing, already planning my next move. They thought they'd evicted me. They had no idea what I was about to do next. I folded my graduation gown and placed it neatly in a box, trying to keep my hands from shaking. The room felt smaller than ever, like the walls were pressing in on me. As I packed my things, my mind wouldn't stop replaying the last few years. Every shift, every late night, every dollar I'd sent home without question. When I started college, I took 2 part-time jobs. In the mornings, I served coffee with a fake smile plastered on my face. And in the evenings, I worked at the library, shelving books until my back hurt. I barely slept, but I didn't complain. Every month, I transferred money to my parents' account. They said it was for household expenses, and I believed them. I thought I was helping keep our home together. I didn't know I was the one paying for it. I lived cheaply, instant noodles, discount clothes, and secondhand textbooks. Whenever my friends went out, I'd make excuses. I told myself it was worth it because my family needed me. Mom always said I was the responsible one, and Dad would tell me that Kieran just needed a little extra support. I trusted them completely. Meanwhile, Kieran got everything handed to him. A brand new car for his birthday, a fully paid college tuition, expensive trips with his fiancée. Every time he posted pictures from some sunny resort, I was probably scrubbing coffee cups or counting coins for rent. No one ever thanked me. No one even noticed. It was like my efforts were invisible, expected, like a quiet background sound no one appreciates until it stops. I used to think if I worked hard enough, they'd be proud of me. I graduated early, made the dean's list, sent money every month, and still nothing. Mom always found something to criticize. "You look tired," she'd say. Or, "Maybe if you were more like your brother." It was never enough. Nothing I did was ever enough. As I taped another box shut, it hit me how deep the lie went. The house they just kicked me out of wasn't theirs. Every payment came from me. Every improvement, every repair, every bit of it had my name written across the bills. I wasn't just a helper. I was the one holding everything up. And they let me believe it was all for family. That thought made something in me change. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was a kind of cold clarity. I saw them for who they really were. People who had used me because they knew I wouldn't question them. I was never a daughter to them. I was a wallet with a heartbeat. I stopped packing for a second and looked around the room that used to feel like home. The bed, the shelves, the faint marks on the wall. I'd worked for every bit of it. And now it wasn't sadness that filled me. It was resolve. They took advantage of my kindness once, but that was over. I'd built this life from nothing, and I could do it again. This time for me, not for them. I loaded the last box into my car and didn't look back at the house. The road ahead was quiet, almost empty, the kind of stillness that made my thoughts sound louder. I didn't cry or hesitate. I just drove. An hour later, I stopped in front of a small brick building in another city. It wasn't much to look at, but it was mine. A place no one knew about. A month ago, I'd started feeling that something was off at home. My parents' tone had changed. They spoke like I was temporary, like my presence was an inconvenience. So I'd rented a tiny studio apartment on the edge of town. It was furnished, clean, and waiting for me, just in case things ever went too far. I didn't expect to use it this soon, but as I unlocked the door, a sense of calm came over me. For the first time in years, the air around me didn't feel heavy. I placed my boxes on the floor and sat for a moment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The silence felt peaceful, not lonely. After a few breaths, I walked over to the small closet and pulled out a metal fireproof box I'd brought with me. I had kept it hidden under my bed for months. Inside were documents, every bank statement, mortgage receipt, utility bill, and transfer slip. Each one had my name on it. I had saved them quietly, one by one, without fully knowing why. Now I did. At the bottom of the stack was the house deed. I had found out weeks earlier that my parents never changed ownership after the final payment. The house was still legally mine. I ran my fingers over the embossed letters of my name. They thought they'd taken everything from me, but the truth was written in black and white. I set the papers neatly on the small dining table and opened my phone. There was only one person I trusted enough to call, Sloane, my old roommate. We'd shared a dorm room during my second year, and she was always the one who stood up for me when others didn't. Now she worked as a paralegal at a respected law firm. When she answered, I could already hear the sharp focus in her voice. "Elara, what's wrong?" "I need help," I said simply. I told her what happened, how my parents threw me out, how I'd been the one paying for the house all along, how they planned to give it to my brother. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a short pause before she said, "You have proof?" "Yes," I replied, glancing at the pile of papers. "Everything." "Good," she said. "Then you're in a much stronger position than they think. Bring me the documents tomorrow. We'll handle this properly." Her words steadied me. It wasn't comfort I needed, it was direction. For years, I had worked quietly, believing that obedience and effort would keep the peace. Now, I was learning that silence had only helped them take more. That night, I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker. The apartment was small, but it felt safe. Every breath I took was mine. I wasn't running anymore. I was preparing. Tomorrow, the real plan would begin. The next morning, I woke up early and drove to the city center. My stomach was tight with nerves, but underneath it all was a quiet determination. The law firm where Sloane worked was in a tall glass building that reflected the morning sun. I'd never been in a place like that before. Polished floors, quiet hallways, people walking fast with purpose. It felt like stepping into a world that finally took things seriously. Sloane met me in the lobby with a quick hug and a look that said she meant business. "Come on," she said, leading me through a corridor to a private meeting room. Inside, a man in a dark suit waited. His name was Mr. Carver, one of the firm's senior partners. His expression was calm but sharp, the kind of man who noticed every detail before you even spoke. I placed the stack of papers on the table. For the next hour, they went through everything: bank statements, receipts, utility bills, and finally, the house deed. Mr. Carver examined each document carefully, nodding slightly as he flipped through the pages. When he looked up, his eyes met mine. "Miss Vance," he said, his tone steady, "this property is entirely yours. The records are clear. Your parents have no legal rights to it." Hearing those words made my chest tighten. For a long moment, I didn't say anything. It wasn't joy I felt. It was something heavier, something like validation after years of being dismissed. I hadn't imagined my worth. It was real, written in legal ink. Sloane smiled faintly. "You did good keeping these records. Most people don't think that far ahead." Mr. Carver leaned back in his chair. "You have a few options," he said. "You can evict them through legal notice, or you can sell the property outright. Both are within your rights." I sat there, weighing his words. Evicting them meant taking back the house and facing them again. Selling it meant cutting the last tie they had to me. I didn't need the building. I needed closure. I want to sell, I said finally. My voice didn't shake. He nodded once, as if he'd expected that answer. Then we'll move forward with that. I'll connect you with a realtor we trust. We can start the paperwork today. Sloan gave me a reassuring look as Mr. Carver handed me a folder with the listing forms. The air in the room felt lighter. For the first time, the future wasn't something that could be taken from me. It was something I could choose. I signed each document carefully, one after another. My signature felt like a quiet declaration. Every stroke of the pen erased another piece of their control. When it was done, Mr. Carver closed the file and said, "They'll be notified through formal channels. Do not respond to them directly. Let us handle any contact." I nodded. I didn't need to argue anymore. The law would speak for me now. As I walked out of the building with Sloan, she looked over and said, "You're doing the right thing." I believed her. The sun was higher now, bright against the glass windows. I felt the warmth on my face, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The house no longer held me, it was just property. What mattered was that I finally had control of my own life. 2 days later, the papers were processed, and the house officially went on the market. The realtor, a confident woman named Dana, promised to handle everything. I gave her the address and told her the tenants were my parents. She raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. "Don't worry," she said. "I've dealt with worse." By the next morning, Dana drove to the house, carrying a clipboard and a bright red for sale sign. According to her later report, my mother opened the door before she even knocked. Brenda's face went from polite confusion to instant rage as soon as Dana introduced herself. "Excuse me? This is our house," she snapped. Dana calmly explained that the property belonged to me and that it had been listed legally. My mother demanded to see proof, her voice rising until neighbors started peeking through their windows. Dana, unbothered, handed her a copy of the listing agreement and walked to the front yard to plant the sign into the grass. That was the moment everything cracked open. Not even 20 minutes later, my phone lit up nonstop. First a call, then another, then dozens. I didn't answer the first few, but curiosity got the better of me. When I finally picked up, my mother's voice burst through the speaker, sharp and frantic. "Ilara, what did you do? How could you sell our house? Have you lost your mind?" I kept my tone even. "It's not your house, Mom. It's mine. You know that now. You ungrateful child," she shouted. "After everything we did for you." I ended the call before she could finish. A second later, my father's number appeared. His voice was lower but full of threat. "You think this is over? You're making a huge mistake. You can't just kick your parents out on the street." "I'm not kicking anyone out," I said calmly. "I'm selling my property. There's a difference." He tried to argue, but I stayed quiet until he ran out of words. When the line went silent, I hung up and blocked his number. Then came Kieran. His tone wasn't angry, it was whiny, almost pathetic. "Ilara, do you realize what you've done? The wedding is in 3 weeks. Where are we supposed to live now? You've ruined everything." I almost laughed. "You'll figure it out. You always do." He begged for a moment longer, trying to guilt me, but it didn't work. When he finally realized I wasn't giving in, he said something about how I'd embarrassed the family and hung up on me. I blocked him too. When the noise stopped, I sat in silence, staring at the city skyline outside my apartment window. My heart wasn't racing, it was steady. Every call, every insult, every attempt to manipulate me only confirmed that I had done the right thing. They were panicking because, for the first time, they couldn't control me. Later that afternoon, I forwarded all their missed calls and voicemails to Sloan. "Let the firm handle it," she said. "You don't owe them a word." I agreed. That night, I muted my phone and made tea. The sound of boiling water filled the small apartment, soft and steady. For years, their voices had dictated every part of my life. Now they were just noise on a blocked list. The house was theirs only in memory, but in reality it belonged to me, and soon it would be gone for good. A few days later, the silence broke again, but this time it wasn't from my parents. It started with one message, then 10, then hundreds. My old phone, the one still connected to my family's group chats, buzzed nonstop. At first, I thought it was about the house sale making its way through the neighborhood. But when I finally opened the messages, I realized it was much worse. Brenda had started her next move. She had called every relative we had, my aunts, uncles, cousins, even distant family I barely knew, and told them her version of the story. According to her, I had betrayed them, sold the family home behind their backs, and left my poor, aging parents homeless. The words were dramatic and full of lies, but my relatives didn't question them. They believed every word. The messages came fast. How could you do that to your parents? You've turned into someone greedy. You're ashamed to the family name. Some were longer, filled with guilt trips about family values and honoring your elders. A few even accused me of being mentally unstable. I could almost hear my mother's voice behind each sentence. It was her favorite tactic: turn everyone against me until I was alone and too guilty to fight back. I didn't reply to any of them. I just scrolled through the flood of messages, each one colder than the last. My chest felt tight, not from guilt, but from realizing how deep her manipulation ran. She'd always cared more about appearances than truth. Now she was turning that obsession into a weapon. My cousin Olivia left a voicemail that summed it all up. Your mom was crying on the phone for an hour. How could you do this? They have nowhere to go. You're heartless. I almost laughed at that. My parents had plenty of money. They just didn't like the idea of losing control. They were never victims, only actors who played the part well enough for others to believe it. When Sloane called to check in, I told her what was happening. She listened quietly, then said, "Don't delete anything. Save every text, every voicemail. If this escalates, it counts as harassment. We'll handle it." So I made a folder on my phone labeled Family. It was a bitter title, but fitting. I saved everything, even the worst ones. The more I read, the clearer it became that I couldn't go back, even if I wanted to. They weren't reaching out to fix things. They were trying to break me again. Later that night, I sat by the window, looking down at the city lights. My phone was still buzzing on the counter, but I ignored it. I'd already given them too much space in my life. Let them talk, let them twist the story. I wasn't the weak, obedient daughter anymore. I turned off the phone completely and placed it face down. The apartment fell silent, except for the faint hum of traffic outside. I made a quiet promise to myself. I would never explain my choices to people who didn't care about the truth. For the first time, their voices didn't reach me. They could spin whatever story they wanted, but I had something they'd never understand: peace and proof. The day of the meeting came sooner than I expected. Sloane called early in the morning to confirm everything was ready. The paperwork was done, the documents were printed, and the lawyer, Mr. Carver, had arranged to meet us at the house. I didn't feel nervous, just tired. It wasn't fear anymore. It was the need to end this chapter once and for all. When we arrived, my parents and Kieran were already waiting outside. The moment they saw me step out of the car, my mother's expression hardened. My father crossed his arms, trying to look composed, while Kieran stood off to the side, shifting uneasily. The air between us was heavy, full of unspoken tension. We entered the house together. It looked the same as always, but it felt different now, colder, smaller, like it no longer belonged to any of us. I set a folder on the kitchen table, and the sound of it landing cut through the silence. Mr. Carver began in a professional tone, explaining that we were there to finalize matters regarding ownership. My mother interrupted before he could finish. "This is ridiculous. We've lived here for decades." "She's being manipulated," she said, glaring at Sloane. Sloane didn't flinch. "Everything here is supported by documentation," she replied evenly. I opened the folder and took out a stack of papers. "I'm not here to argue," I said quietly. "I just want you to see the truth." I spread out a printed spreadsheet across the table. Each row listed payments, dates, and bank transfers. Every cent I had ever sent. The numbers spoke for themselves. My father leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "You kept all this?" "Yes," I said. "Every transaction. You told me I was helping the family. But I was paying the mortgage alone." Kieran scoffed. "You make it sound like we forced you." I turned to him. "You didn't have to force me. You all just made sure I believed it was my responsibility. You got cars, trips, and comfort. I got debt and silence." My mother's voice rose, desperate now. "You're exaggerating. Families share things, money, support. Families also tell the truth." I cut in, my voice calm but sharp. "You never told me the house was meant for Kieran. You used me to protect something that was never supposed to be mine." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the ticking clock on the wall. Then Mr. Carver cleared his throat and handed them an envelope. "This is a formal eviction notice," he said. "The property is under contract for sale. You have 30 days to vacate." My mother's face went pale. "You can't do this to us." "I'm not doing anything to you," I said. "I'm simply ending what you started." Mr. Carver continued. "Any contact made outside legal communication will be considered harassment and reported. Further violations may result in a restraining order." Kieran muttered something under his breath, but no one listened. My father looked at me like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't. I gathered the documents and stood up. "This is over," I said softly. "You'll get official updates through my lawyer. Please don't contact me again." Without waiting for a response, I turned toward the door. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit my face, and for the first time, it didn't sting. It felt clean, like freedom. Behind me, the voices began to rise again, angry and desperate, but I didn't turn back. I didn't need to. The truth was already on paper, and that was enough. The following weeks unfolded like a quiet storm. I didn't go near the house again, but the news still reached me through whispers and updates from Sloan. It turned out that once the eviction notice arrived, everything began to fall apart for them. The image they had worked so hard to maintain started to crack. Kieran was the first to feel the impact. His fiancée, Natalie, had been planning a grand wedding, one my parents had promised would take place in the very house I had sold. When she learned the truth, she was furious. She had thought Kieran came from a stable family with money and status. The moment she found out the house wasn't his and that they had no right to it, she called everything off. She didn't even want to discuss it. "I can't marry into this mess," she told him, according to one of her friends who later messaged me. Kieran tried to convince her it was just a misunderstanding, that I was the one being cruel. But by then, his excuses meant nothing. She gave back the ring, packed her things, and disappeared from his life. The wedding was canceled. The deposits were lost, and so was his pride. For the first time, he couldn't rely on someone else to fix things for him. While Kieran's life was falling apart, my parents faced their own reality. Without my money coming in, their savings dried up quickly. My father had grown used to spending without thinking, and my mother was addicted to keeping up appearances. They had built their reputation around comfort and status, but when the bills came due, there was nothing left to hide behind. Sloan later told me they tried applying for new loans, but the bank rejected them. With no steady income and no property in their name, they had no leverage. Eventually, they had to accept what they had spent years denying. They couldn't afford the life they pretended to have. They moved out of the house just before the 30-day deadline. Dana, the realtor, said they didn't even say goodbye to the neighbors. My mother avoided eye contact with everyone, her voice quiet for once. My father loaded the last boxes into an old truck, his expression unreadable. They ended up renting a small apartment on the outskirts of town. The place was old, the walls thin, and the noise constant. Brenda stopped calling relatives after that. The same people she once charmed had grown distant. Without a grand house or a showy lifestyle to maintain, she lost the audience that used to feed her pride. Mark started working long shifts doing small repairs for extra cash. The man who once lectured me about duty was now struggling to pay for groceries. I didn't feel joy hearing any of this. What I felt was distance, like watching a story end that no longer belonged to me. Their downfall wasn't my revenge. It was the result of their own choices catching up to them. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered if they ever thought about how differently things could have gone. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. But it no longer mattered. I had stopped waiting for their remorse a long time ago. They had built their lives on lies, and once those lies were exposed, everything else collapsed. I didn't have to lift a finger. The truth did the work for me. Within a month, the house was off the market. Dana called early one morning, her voice bright with excitement. "It's done," she said. "We've got a solid buyer, full asking price." I didn't say much, just thanked her quietly and sat there for a while, letting the words settle. It was strange to think that the place I once called home, the same house that held so many bitter memories, was finally gone. The sale went through faster than I expected. When the payment cleared, my bank app showed a number larger than anything I'd ever seen next to my name. It didn't feel real at first. For years, my money had vanished into bills and debts. Now, for the first time, it was coming back to me, all of it. It wasn't just about wealth. It was proof that every sleepless night, every hard shift, every moment of humiliation had led to something solid, something mine. I transferred part of the funds into a savings account and took a deep breath. It was the first time in my life I didn't have to worry about what someone else would take from me. That thought alone felt like freedom. A week later, I met with a realtor to look for a new place. I wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere that didn't remind me of anyone else's plans. We visited a few apartments, but none of them felt right. Then I found it, a condo near the river, small but full of light. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, and in the evenings, the sunset painted the walls gold. The moment I stepped inside, I knew it was mine. The process was smooth. I paid the down payment in full, signed the paperwork, and got the keys that same week. No joint names, no shared accounts, no obligations. Just me. Standing in the middle of that empty space, I realized how long it had been since I'd felt safe anywhere. I furnished the condo slowly, choosing every piece myself. A soft couch, a simple bed, plants by the window. There was no noise, no shouting, no guilt. Just quiet. Each morning, sunlight spilled through the glass and filled the room, and I would sit with my coffee, feeling the peace I had once thought I'd never find. The money from the sale wasn't just a reward. It was a clean slate. I didn't see it as revenge anymore. It was balance. Everything I had given away without thanks had come back to me in one final act of justice. Sometimes I'd drive past the old neighborhood, not to revisit it, but to remind myself how far I'd come. The new owners had painted the house a pale gray. It looked smaller than I remembered. I didn't stop the car. I didn't need to. That part of my life was closed. Back in my condo, I opened the balcony doors and watched the city lights flicker below. The air was cool, the night still. I didn't think about what I'd lost anymore, only what I'd gained. The walls around me weren't built from obligation or fear. They were built from my own choices, my own strength. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was living completely and freely, in a space that was entirely mine. Night settled softly over the city, lights glimmering across the skyline like quiet stars. I sat on the balcony of my condo, a cup of tea warming my hands. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint hum of traffic below. For the first time in years, my mind wasn't racing. There was no anger left, no ache, just calm. I had finally stopped looking back. I thought about everything that had happened. The house, the betrayal, the noise of it all. It used to haunt me, but now it felt like something that belonged to someone else. The pain had faded into distance, replaced by something lighter. The silence around me wasn't empty. It was peaceful. It was freedom. Inside, the apartment was quiet and simple. Every item had a story that started with me, not with anyone else's choices. I didn't know explanations or apologies. That truth alone made the air easier to breathe. I realized then that my revenge had never been about payback. It was about release. They had tried to break me, to make me feel small and replaceable. But all they did was push me toward independence. Losing them was what gave me the strength to build something real. The life I was living now, steady, calm, and my own, was proof that I had won in the only way that mattered. I didn't need to see their downfall or hear their regrets. Knowing they no longer had power over me was enough. They could tell whatever stories they wanted. None of it could reach me here. I had built walls that weren't made of bricks, but of self-respect and distance. The night breeze brushed my hair as I leaned back and looked at the city again. People moved in and out of buildings below, each living a life that probably had its own quiet struggles. Everyone, I thought, has a moment when they have to decide whether to keep living in someone else's shadow or step into their own light. If you were me, could you forgive them? Could you let go and start over without bitterness? I don't know the answer for anyone else. But as I sat there, watching the lights flicker across the glass towers, I knew mine. I had finally found peace. And this time I was truly home.